kind of go before. One thing I think everyone who's thinking about the SAT and the ACT really worries about is like, is that score going to solely determine where I go to college? And I always try to remind people who come to us or we work with that it's just one component, right? It's what is your academic record, right? What are your grades? What do you get in that standardized test? It certainly matters, but it's not the only thing. What are your extracurriculars? And then what's your essay? What's your college application look like? They're looking for well-rounded students and things that make you unique in comparison to the other folks that you're applying against. I always talk about this a little bit. Most people go through the standardized test process, right? So you start taking the PSAT. Most high schools offer that sophomore year. You take it again your junior year in the fall, when that accounts for whether you get national merit scholarships or not. If you're pre-PSAT and you think you're in that category where you might be able to get a national merit scholarship, that's often the first time that we suggest tutoring for standardized exams, because that honor really makes you stick out from the crowd. It makes a big difference when you're applying. And then the SAT or the ACT, whichever one you choose to take, starting junior year. Most people should be taking that the spring of their junior year, the first time, March, April, May, June, one of those depending on your schedule and other requirements on your time, and then plan to take another exam around this time, your senior year. So October tends to be when students take their second one, as long as they're scoring well. Most of the time I don't recommend anybody taking more than 3 when your score doesn't move all that much, frankly, between 2 and 3. And it's a big strain on your life and getting ready for it. It's not worth it if you're not going to get ready for it. So as I alluded to before, they redesigned the SAT, and this is really in reaction to the ACT. So for a long time, the SAT, especially in the Northeast, was the dominant test, right? Everyone took the SAT. It was without a doubt you took the SAT. Meanwhile, in the Midwest and South, I grew up in Kentucky, everyone took the ACT for a long time. When I went to go take the SAT, my guidance counselor was like, literally didn't even know where I had to go do that, so I had to figure it out. Over the last 10 years, really, the ACT has taken a lot of market share from the SAT. Where now every school in the country takes both SAT and ACT, and more people last year and the year before took the ACT and then the SAT. So the SAT responded and changed their test. So it's now 2 800-point sections, math section, evidence-based reading and writing test. So it's back to the 1600-point scale that we all remember, but they've changed a few things. So one, there's now sub-scores. So looking at how are you doing in different categories. So they break down math, they break down reading and writing, and then cross-test scores. So how are you using functional areas across? So whether it's in the math section having some science or history and social studies, they have both. So looking at those scores as well. As far as admissions is concerned, these sub-scores and cross-test scores aren't really considered outside of these scores yet. Admissions counselors, for what it's worth on the SAT, haven't figured out exactly what to do yet because the scoring scale changed and it's very different now. So they don't have a slew of data to figure out where people are slotting in. So they're having a little bit of trouble figuring out, okay, someone gets a 1450 on the SAT, what does that mean? And so they're figuring that out over time. It's important to know that. So the structure is always the same. It's a reading test for 65 minutes, then the writing and language arts, math, no calculator, math with a calculator. As you see, the math, no calculator is shorter, but lots of students struggle on that more. They're used to just plugging things in their calculator and getting an answer. And an optional fifth essay. It's a long test. It's the sort of thing that you need to build a test endurance up for, be used to it, know the types of questions, so that you can get through it very quickly. That tends to be especially true on the first section, the reading test, and the fourth section, the math test, which are obviously long in terms of total time and require some endurance, especially when you get to that fourth section. There's 4 multiple choices per question. So what I always tell people is that elimination is one of your best tools on the SAT. There's only one right answer, and figuring out which answers are wrong is just as important as figuring out which answer is right. And now there's no penalty for wrong answer choices. So for a long time, the SAT had a penalty for wrong answers, and the ACT did not. And the SAT changed that, partly matching what the ACT had done. So I alluded to this a little bit, why the redesign. One, trying to make it more like the ACT. The idea was that the SAT did not correlate as well as they would have liked with college readiness. Ultimately, the SAT and ACT are trying to see how ready you are to do college level work. And when they looked at the statistics, it didn't really match up. Lots of people who got an acceptable score on the SAT were still taking remedial classes when they got to college. So they now changed it where they, everybody remembers, who's a little bit older, the vocabulary part of the SAT, memorizing a lot of random words that were esoteric and words you wouldn't use in your everyday life. They've gotten rid of that. There's not that pressure anymore. Instead, they have passages that you can Google for the reading section, words that you use, writing and language that you use in your everyday life, and just seeing things that you would actually use in college and in your professional life and seeing how well you do with them. The mathematics section has changed mostly by integrating other things and making it more like the ACT math was, where it's a lot more word problems and figuring those sorts of things out. Where before it was trying to test, like, do you remember the formula for a circle, right? And how to apply that. There's still some of that, but it's trying to put it into real life applications a lot more. So just quickly about the evidence-based reading and writing. So on the reading test, there's 5 total passages. As I said, you can Google all of them. They're actual passages. The SAT, the College Board, which is actually located here in New York, for a long time wrote their own passages that were obscure and used language, like a combination of language that like few people would ever use. There's always the same number, so 1 US world literature passage, 2 history and social studies, and 2 science passages. Students sometimes struggle on the science passages because they think they need to have special knowledge or specific scientific knowledge to do well on that, but you don't. It's really testing your reading comprehension. And also a little bit of charts and graphs are thrown in there as well, so making sure you can interpret and understand what those mean. The writing and language arts, again, it's a standard every time. It's exactly like this, so you know exactly what you're facing. 35 minutes, 44 questions, a little bit of a time crunch on here, and it really tests your grammar and your word usage, right? So instead of having the analogies that everyone remembers, it's more your word usage, which word best suits here with writing style and the idea that they're trying to convey. Cool. So I think we mostly went over this. There's a few differences, and one of the things that's important is like what do students need to know to succeed on reading? So it's active reading all the time. Most students tend to, the first time they go through, read things not really saying like what's the thesis, what's the synthesis of this paragraph, what are they trying to portray, what's the information ideas that they're trying to convey. Most of the passages come in one of 2 forms. One form being a statement of an idea, right, and backing that idea up all the way through, or looking at 2 different ideas and how those ideas compare and contrast. And knowing which passage you have, and then which section or which paragraph matches to the different ideas is really important because it helps you answer the questions much faster. Yeah, so I was just talking a little bit about this as well, going through that, so I'll just kind of pass through there. And then the writing and language arts test. So now it's all based on passages. Instead of separating out sentences, it's literally paragraphs, and then ask you questions about those paragraphs, which is appreciably different than what it was before. As I mentioned as well, it'll have 1 graphical analysis, so moving graphs and charts and doing this cross-subject area is a big movement by the SAT, something the ACT's done for a long time, and something that shows to correlate with college performance better than just asking esoteric things that you can memorize. And passages will vary and have ranks. So essentially you're always going to have a couple easy ones, a couple medium difficulty, and a couple really hard on every test. And the hard tend to be towards the end of that section. That's true in math as well, actually. So on the math test, there's now the no math and the math section. As you see, there's a fair amount of questions. One big difference is there's now 13 gridding questions. So instead of just multiple choices, you literally have to come up with the answer. They don't give you any information. You just write down the number for that. That's pretty different, and getting prepared for that means that you have to remember how to do a few things. You can't use the guess and check method as much. The questions always broke down into 4 sections. So part of algebra is algebra 1 and algebra 2 tends to be more heavy algebra 1. It's the sort of thing solve for x, and just in various different forms and using formulas and rates and things like that. Problem solving and data analysis, just what you think it is, that's where a lot of the charts and graphs come in. Like, do you actually understand what these things mean? Do you actually understand how to apply the y the line equation y equals mx plus b, and see how to use that. And then Passport to Advanced Math tends to be kind of combining these algebra and data analysis things, tends to go into Algebra 2, a little bit more of geometry, and tends to be the best way to solve a lot of those is more a simple way. They're often complex questions that have a simple answer. For instance, on probably half of those questions, just plugging in the available choices is the fastest way to solve them. Plug in, the answers are 2, 4, 6, and 8. Plug in 6, see what happens. If it's big or too small, go the other way. So it's not often, they often end up not being that difficult if you understand what the questions are answering. And then they have some cross tests in here as well. So in history and social studies and science as well. This just gives you a breakdown of the questions, what percentage of the test they are. I think it's always important for students, especially if it's been a couple years since you've had algebra or a year or two, to go through algebra when you're preparing for the test, to go through geometry. The test gives you a lot of the formulas for area, of different things, and some of the quadratic, all that stuff is there, but it's actually the application of it and how you use it. And being very familiar with it will make the test go much faster for you. Like the flipping back and forth often slows people down quite a bit. Cool, so that's about the new SAT. Any questions about that? I'll just pause for a second.
So, this optional essay.
Yeah.
If you choose not to write the optional essay, you just leave the test room. Is there a reason to stay and write the optional essay?
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, I don't think there really is. I think over time there will be, right? So it is getting into the College Board, just the company, right, decided to do something and change something that's really a service for colleges, right? So they can evaluate a large group of students.
Right.
The admissions counselors, if you talk to them at various universities, don't know what to do with even the 1600 score, let alone the essay yet. So they'll score the essay, but what does that mean?
Right.
No one's really sure yet.
Yeah, I would say to that also, sort of what Mike was saying earlier about how this test is more geared towards college readiness than anything.
Right.
That optional essay is a huge piece of that, right? It's the College Board saying, all right, well, we're going to throw this in, and if someone fills it out, it kind of gives you a more dynamic picture of who the student is, how they write, their unique voice. It's a way of getting the standardized test sort of up a level, because I'm sure you're aware there's a lot of backlash, right? Like, are standardized tests reasonable? Is it like a socioeconomic thing? I'm sure you know all the controversy around it. So I think going back to Mike's point about, college readiness and really catering to college admissions people, I think the essay really helps in that way.
And just out of curiosity, is it an assigned topic? Is it like write about these 3 things?
Yeah.
So
It's not free.
It's not a personal essay.
Right.
So, I mean, it might be.
No, but yes, but still you get to see how the student writes, which is sort of a unique.
About
yeah,
students.
right, exactly.
Right, but from an admissions perspective, I don't think they know what to do with it yet, and it's just help rounding out the application.
Right.
It's just another chance to express your voice.
Right.
Right. So it's I don't have great advice on what to a year from now we'll probably know what to do on that. Right now we're literally in the first group of students who even have a new SAT score, and that's only a very small handful of them because it was last spring. Right, so we only have a handful of people who've taken and actually gotten a score at this point.
I just want to go back a tiny little bit.
Yeah.
How long has it been 2400 or what?
2400 was.
It's like when we did it, it was 1600.
1600. When I did it was
1,000 years ago,
when I did it was 1600. It was 1600 up until I want to say 07, 08, and then they changed it. Maybe a couple years and they only had the 2400 exam for a very short amount of time.
That's what I thought.
It was a very short amount of time.
And still the admissions directors don't know how to go back to the 1600. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, well, the 2400 they have very clear how the 2400 maps the old 1600. So if you look at the history of the SAT was originally an IQ test.
Right.
And it was very it was relatively difficult for a long time, where getting a 1500 was a very small fraction of the population would get a 1500. Around the late 90s, they changed that. So they made the test easier. So if you talk to people who took the test pre-97, 96, 97, they were actually on a harder scale than the folks who took it from 97 until 2008 when they went to 2400. They made that test easier. So there's a lot more 1500 scores in that 10-year period than there had been in the previous 10-year period. Then they changed it to 2400, which which is just different. College admissions had no idea what to do with that for the first year or two, and then changed it back. And now there's still not a mapping of like, well, what does that score mean relative to the other scores? Because ultimately, what a college is trying to do is have the highest admission scores, right, that they possibly can, because that gets them higher up in the rankings. That's ultimately what they want. So the idea right now in the SAT of how admissions counselors are taking is they think it's easier, right? And so a 1550 on this test does not mean the same thing as the equivalent on a 2400 test or what a 1550 meant before, but they're not sure about that.
And what's the correlation to the ACT? Like,
Yeah, so previously, there's a very clear correlation of like what you got in the 2400, what you get on the ACT, and then what you got in the 1600 SAT to the ACT. That correlation is not really known yet. There's not enough data, right? We were on 3 tests of the new SAT, so we don't have enough data yet to know what that would correlate to.
and why do kids choose to take one rather than the other?
So that's a very good question. It comes down to a couple things. One is how you think and how you do on the test. That used to be a much bigger thing. Now that the SAT is really reverted to being, I shouldn't say reverted, but moved to being more like the ACT.
Right.
It's not as clear from like the type of student you are, or how you think, or how you do.